Four transfer portal signees for the Tigers. They are on fire. We're talking about those players and who's next to pop. It's Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. What a run for Brian Kelly and the Tigers if they have popped 4 transfer portal commits. We're talking about each of them. We'll get you an update on Garrett Nussmeier, his health. Remember, he was injured in that Oklahoma game and why he came back. Also, who's next to pop for the Tigers in this portal class? We'll give you the name you need to know that's coming up here on Locked on LSU. Okay, let's go chronologically how this is all transpired. So Friday afternoon, as Brian Kelly was meeting with reporters announcing his $1 million match, during that press conference, or just prior to it, news came that Bauer Sharp, the tight end from Oklahoma, not only committed to LSU, but signed. And Brian Kelly did, in fact, talk about him during that media availability. Here's what you need to know about Bauer Sharp. First of all, as an LSU fan, you can exhale, okay? One of the things that I've told you and others have as well, but it's one thing to have all these guys visit, and that's very exciting. It's exciting to talk about the targets. It's exciting to get the visits, but you have to land these guys. 2 years ago, we talked about Braden Fisk. Remember that name? Braden Fisk visited LSU. They were very much in on him. And Florida State came up with a better plan, better offer, and he played at Florida State, was an All-American, is now starting for the Los Angeles Rams. Dominic Williams, Simeon Barrow a year ago. It's fun to talk about them. It's fun to think about them. But until you get them signed, sealed, delivered, it's just a thought. Well, now you got your first in Bauer Sharp on Friday. There was more to come. Tight end was a must. Obviously, Mason Taylor to the NFL. Kamorian Pimpton to the transfer portal. Trey'Dez Green has moved to wide receiver. He could, in theory, move back to tight end. But when you look at Bauer Sharp, this is a guy at 6'4", 245. Brian Kelly talked about his physicality, likes him as a blocker, but also a guy that led Oklahoma in both receptions and receiving yards in 2024. And this is a guy familiar with Louisiana. He was a high school quarterback in Maryland, went to Southeastern Louisiana in Hammond. They moved him to tight end, where he played for 3 years. This year in 2024, spent 1 year at Oklahoma, and then now is transferring to LSU. So you love that he's familiar with Louisiana, having spent 3 years here at Southeastern and Hammond. Being that he played at Oklahoma this year, he played in Tiger Stadium. He actually threw an interception. It was the double pass that got intercepted by Sage Ryan, but he's played in Tiger Stadium. He's played in SEC venue. So it's not like a player going from the FCS to the SEC. Look, that didn't work out well for Tremont Shorts 2 years ago for LSU. Remember, he was a FCS All-American lineman at East Tennessee State, came to LSU, couldn't get on the field. Now with Bauer Sharp, he's already made that transition. He went from the FCS for 3 years to Oklahoma and starred for them. Now, another year in the SEC. He's been in SEC venues. He's proven he can do it against SEC competition. Check. There just aren't as many questions there. 36 collegiate games played, 22 collegiate games started. He was in the same high school class as Garrett Nussmeier. So you're talking about a guy that's been around college football, which is great. And when you look at the tight end room now for 2025, you've got Bauer Sharp, who is your plug-and-play starter, replacing Mason Taylor. You've got J.D. LaFleur coming in. Trey'Dez Green could go back to tight end. Bo Bordelon has played tight end sort of as the tackle eligible, right? He puts on the 89 jersey and lines up as a tight end, but really an extra blocker. But I really think you got to add another tight end. You got to get a blocker. If it's JUCO, if it's the spring portal cycle, we'll see. But this is a massive get because it was arguably the top tight end in this portal cycle and you landed him. On Saturday morning, the good news continued with Berrien Brown. Now, Berrien Brown, the receiver out of Kentucky, is someone we anticipated. He was already projected to land with LSU. Well, now it's official. He's signed. 6'1", 182. He signed with Kentucky out of the state of Tennessee in 2022. And he was a consensus five-star. Berrien Brown was a consensus five-star, and On3 rated him the number 2 receiver in the country. And his 3 years at Kentucky lived up to it. Okay, receiver was a must for LSU. You're losing Kyron Lacy, CJ Daniels in the transfer portal, Mason Taylor to the draft, Samson and Ibieta have left. 3 of your top 4 pass catchers are gone. You're returning Aaron Anderson. You're returning Xavier Thomas. Chris Hilton is practicing, so it looks like he'll be back, at least for the bowl game. We assume next year. Kyle Parker coming off of injury. But Berrien Brown is a guy that in 2022 was a freshman All-American with 50 receptions at Kentucky for over 600 yards. In 2023, he came back, was an All-American as a kick returner, returning 3 kickoffs for touchdowns. So not only can he help you in the pass game, but also obviously in the return game as well. And this is a guy this year, though, who, look, Kentucky was terrible. They were 111th in the country in pass offense. They were 118th in the country in scoring offense. They were atrocious. They were a terrible offense, and they buried an elite player like Berrien Brown. Now he comes to Baton Rouge where he can step in day one and be your number 1 receiver. Like, he is your plug-and-play number 1 elite receiver, former 5-star who comes in and is ready to roll. He'll be playing for his 4th OC in as many years, but this will by far be the best quarterback he will play with, and it's not even remotely close considering the guys, the revolving door of transfers he's played with at Kentucky. So you got Bauer Sharp, you got Berrien Brown, you got 2 pass catchers effectively to replace Mason Taylor and Kyron Lacy, who was your leading receiver this past year. But Berrien Brown was more highly rated than Kyron Lacy and actually is one of those game-breaking type wide receivers at 6'1", 185. He's more Malik Neighbors, a guy that is a true game breaker. The Tigers would add 2 more players. They would add Jakeem Jackson. Now, Jackson is a guy we also talked about. When Jackson, transferring him from Florida, by the way, when Jackson was coming out of high school in the class of 2023, he was the number 3 corner in the country in the On3 composite. He played in every game as a freshman in a reserve role. This year, 2024, as a sophomore, Jakeem Jackson started the first 2 games against Miami, then against Samford, then was injured, missed the rest of the season. But remember, this is a guy that was a high 4-star, borderline 5-star, the number 3 corner in the country, played immediately at Florida and signed there with Corey Raymond. So now Corey Raymond at LSU, as soon as Jakeem Jackson went in the portal, boom, everyone knew this was a foregone conclusion. He was coming to Baton Rouge to play for Corey Raymond at LSU. This is the replacement for Cade Phillips, the 5-star out of Texas who flipped to Texas because he got a better NIL deal. So now you look and you go, okay, Ashton Stamps is a 3-year starter. DJ Pickett, 5-star, number 1 cornerback in America. Jakeem Jackson, former number 3 cornerback in America who's entering his 3rd year of college football. And you're getting PJ Woodland back. That's a really good quartet to start at the cornerback position for 2025. So Jakeem Jackson was a massive get. And then they polished off Saturday night with Jamari Butler. Jamari Butler's the edge rusher out of Nebraska, 6'5", 260. He had LSU in his final 3. And so LSU beat out Texas A&M and Florida State for Jamari Butler. Again, you had to go toe-to-toe with big-time programs with deep pockets that were spending in the portal as well for this guy, and you landed him. It speaks to exactly what Brian Kelly said. They were going to be aggressive in the portal. I told you after Bryce Underwood and Cade Phillips and Jakeem Stewart all went elsewhere, I told you at the time that freed up cash. LSU had their number. They were willing to spend on those guys. And when the bidding exceeded that, they stepped away from the table. Not easy to do, but they did it. And as a result, it freed up tons of cash. And you're seeing the windfall of that now. So let me ask you a question. Would you rather incoming true freshman Cade Phillips or third-year SEC player Jakeem Jackson? Would you rather true freshman Bryce Underwood or fifth-year senior, second-year starter Garrett Nussmeier in 2025? Would you rather Jakeem Stewart, early enrollee, played 10 high school games in 3 years at $2 million, or a guy like Jamari Butler, who's entering his 6th collegiate season? You're starting to get it. This was the decision they made. We have our number, and we're not going to overspend on freshmen. We'll still have a great class, but we'll allocate those funds if we can't get them to go ham in the portal, and you're seeing it. That's already 4 players, 4 key players, 4 immediate impact players out of the portal for LSU here for 2025. This is how you build that roster into an immediate contender, and they're on their way. We also know the next name likely to pop for LSU, and we'll get to that next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. All right, y'all, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So the Tigers have already popped 4 signees out of the portal. Well, who might be next? Remember the name Braylon Moore. So Braylon Moore, for the last 2 years, has been the starting center at Virginia Tech. Yes, we know center was a huge bugaboo for LSU in 2024. Well, they fixed it, apparently. Steve Wiltfong, national recruiting analyst from On3. Pete Nakos, On3's transfer portal reporter. Shea Dixon, On3, the Bengal Tiger LSU analyst. All 3 are predicting LSU to land starting center Braylon Moore from Virginia Tech. It's one thing if some random person says it. It's another when 3 highly respected people in the recruiting industry are all telling you the same thing. By the way, all of these people logged predictions for LSU to land Jakeem Jackson and to land Bauer Sharp and to land Barian Brown. So you can see where this is going. Braylon Moore, let me give you a little background. He'll have 2 years of eligibility remaining. I don't know if he'll use them both, but he'll have 2 years remaining. 6'3", 303, redshirt sophomore, so just finished his 3rd year of college. He allowed just 3 sacks this season and 375 snaps. He's from Pennsylvania, signed with Virginia Tech in the 2022 class, was the 35th best interior offensive lineman in the composite, but On3 rated him the 16th best interior lineman in the composite coming out of high school. So he goes to Virginia Tech, is a rotational player in year 1, and the last 2 years has been a starter for Virginia Tech, starting every game the last 2 seasons. You know, offensive line for LSU was a need. Remember, we've talked wants, needs, musts. Tight end was a must because you didn't have any tight. The only scholarship tight end you had is incoming freshman J.D. LaFleur. That was a must. Offensive line's a need. You had numbers at offensive line, and you've recruited a lot of talented guys out of the high school ranks. What you don't have is experience. Let me rephrase that. What you didn't have was experience until you added Braylon Moore. Now, we're all assuming that this is a formality, and we'll wait for it to happen, but this is the name to watch. So, Brian Kelly on National Signing Day, he was talking about defense, but he said, we can't go into a game starting 5 freshmen or playing 5 freshmen and a sophomore and expect to compete at the highest level. That's when he was talking about NIL and everything. But the point remains, you ended up playing a lot of young players on defense this year, from Deshaun Spears and PJ Woodland and your young linebackers like Devon Keys and Gabe Relaford and Dominic McKinley. You played a ton of young guys defensively. And Brian Kelly's telling, yes, you want those guys to play and you want them to develop in your program and be really good, but you can't count on that number of players to be key impact guys for you. You've got to have veterans. Well, look ahead to next year on the offensive line. DJ Chester played a lot this year. Wasn't great at center, but played a lot for you, and I think is probably a better guard. We got to see over the final month of the season, Paul Mabenga improve every single week from Bama to Oklahoma. Every week he stair-stepped up with his level of play. Weston Davis was a 5-star, could play right tackle. Tyree Adams will be entering his 3rd year. They love him. He was your 6th offensive lineman this year. So Cohen Eccles is someone they like a lot. So they got guys. They're just young, inexperienced guys. So if you believe Brian Kelly, yeah, you can play young guys, but you've also got to have veteran leadership. Someone like Braylon Moore immediately gives you that. The other part of that, too, is if you add Braylon Moore as a plug-and-play center, that allows you to move DJ Chester, who started this year as an experienced player. That allows you to move DJ Chester to guard and maybe Paul Mabenga at the other guard spot. Okay, well, now all of a sudden, your interior offensive line is pretty good. It's not what it was when you had Dellinger and Frazier, a couple of 3- and 4-year starters, but at least you've got some experience there now. And then at tackle, it could be Tyree Adams at left. It could be Weston Davis at right. Bo Bordelon could certainly play. You could figure it out. But the point is, you have numbers. And by figuring out what was your weakest link this year at center and adding a guy like Braylon Moore, if in fact this happens, now all of a sudden you've improved your spot at center. DJ Chester can go play his natural spot. It makes you better everywhere. And of course, you can still go into the portal and get more players. So that's going to be the next one to watch. Braylon Moore has played in 28 career games with 24 career starts. He is a plug-and-play starter at center. I'll remind you, on National Signing Day, came right here and I told you, while people were melting after Bryce Underwood's flip and Cade Phillips flipped and Jakeem Stewart signed with USC, I came to this show and I told you, talk to me in a month. I told you. Go back and listen if you want. It's a great thing about the digital era. Everything's recorded. I don't have to make it up. You can go listen to it yourself. Go listen to our signing day show. The thing I said was, listen, I understand 2 things can be true at the same time, and I understand the disappointment of not getting Underwood, of not getting Jakeem Stewart, of not getting Cade Phillips. But you had money allocated for those players. You were fiscally responsible, and you said, let's not overspend for freshmen. Let's take that money instead and go be aggressive in the transfer portal. Let's finish the 2025 class. Let's retain our roster, and let's go be aggressive in the transfer portal. Well, you fast forward a week and a half now, and I said, talk to me in a month. That's been my refrain. Talk to me in a month. Well, fast forward a week and a half. Garrett Nussmeier is returning. You've added an elite starting tight end, plug-and-play starting tight end. You've added an elite plug-and-play starting cornerback, an elite plug-and-play defensive end. You've added an elite plug-and-play wide receiver, former 5-star dynamic player. By the way, 3 of the players I just mentioned. Bauer Sharp from Oklahoma, Jakeem Jackson from Florida. you're talking about guys, Barry and Brown from Kentucky, all who have played in the SEC. Jamari Butler is in the Big Ten at Nebraska. Braylon Moore is in the ACC at Virginia Tech. Now, all of a sudden, you're adding veteran starters, elite veteran starters at these positions that immediately make you better. I told you then, talk to me in a month. It's been a week and a half. Feel better? You should. And they're not done. We'll tell you much more as LSU continues in this portal cycle. Who else they may pop. We'll have it all for you right here on Locked on LSU. In the meantime, Tigers are getting ready for a bowl game, and Garrett Nussmeier is leading them. I have an injury update on Garrett Nussmeier. Remember, he was injured in that bowl game, or in that regular season finale against Oklahoma. I've got the latest. It's Locked on LSU, your team every day. Y'all, it's that time of year. The college football playoff is back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the College Football Playoff Kickoff Show, presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup, SMU battling Penn State at noon Eastern. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the College Football Playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. So LSU isn't going to be playing in the College Football Playoff, that much we know. But the Tigers are getting ready for a bowl game, and they do have Garrett Nussmeier in tow. When Brian Kelly met with reporters on Friday, he did talk about Nussmeier's decision to return to LSU and his health. Let's start with, we'll get to the bowl game in a second, but let's start with Garrett Nussmeier's decision to return to LSU. Here was Brian Kelly.
You know, knowing Garrett, there was always a sense of he had waited for his opportunity, and he had been such a proponent of, LSU and wanting to be here that I think there was always this sense that, he was going to come back, but we never took it for granted. We did our due diligence. We made our case as to why it was in everybody's best interest for him to come back for another year, and re-recruited him from that standpoint. And when we were able to, present him with what we felt was, a great opportunity from a, NIL to revenue sharing and all the things that go along with that go along with a, arguably the best quarterback in the SEC, right? And maybe in the country. Then we were able to close this and get him to publicly say that he was coming back. So I think there was a lot of confidence, but you never take that for granted. You have to re-recruit, and we re-recruited him, and we're excited that he's back.
So Garrett Nussmeier is back, and we talked about it. We had a full episode on Nussmeier's decision to return, if you want to go back and check that out. But wanted Brian Kelly's perspective there, and notice he punctuated it there with an NIL opportunity and revenue share. And, Matt Rule told us a year ago that the going rate for a quarterback was, an elite quarterback at the portal was $1 to $2 million. And I'm telling you, Garrett Nussmeier landed on the high end of that number. So it cost LSU, but very sensibly and able to front load that deal because they were so flush with cash. They could front load that deal with NIL dollars and not dramatically impact the revenue share this fall. So I don't want to go too deep into the weeds. I've explained that plenty, but suffice to say there's a big difference between revenue share and NIL, and a lot of collectives are front-loading deals. So let's say, hypothetically, throw out the number. If LSU committed $2 million to Garrett Nussmeier, hypothetically, just throwing out the number, what if in rev share they had $300K, $400K earmarked for Nussmeier? Well, now they could front load it with $1.5 million in NIL and keep him at that 300 thereabouts. I'm ballparking here. I'm being very transparent. I don't know if that's the number, but I'm just saying hypothetically, that's how they could have done it to make it make sense and not affect the revenue share in the fall. So you could still keep the rest of your roster in place. One more from Brian Kelly on Nussmeier. I asked him point blank, is Nussmeier practicing? Remember, last time we saw Garrett Nussmeier, he was writhing in pain on the field against Oklahoma, went to the locker room, got x-rayed, came back, played, but after the game said he was going to take a month and get his body ready to play in the bowl game. But still, looked like a pretty severe injury. So how's it going?
Yes, he practiced. We're going to be careful with his pitch count, and when I use that term pitch count in terms of throws, he was we try to keep him about 60% today in terms of throws, but physically moving around, participated in 7-on-7, or 11-on-11 today, 1-on-1. So he's doing everything. We're just trying to keep his player load down a little bit right now, and we'll continue to ramp it up over the week.
So they're getting ready and continuing to get ready for the bowl game against Baylor. One thing to remember is finals are over now. So as I was told, the first practice on Thursday, they were, my goodness, LSU had this sort of player chart where it was the entire roster, and the available players for practice were like a white sheet of paper, and those that were unavailable were grayed out, and the color gray, and the majority of the roster was gray. Second practice, that flipped. So now with guys finished with, so as to say, let me explain that. So as to say, if you'd gone out to practice and seen so many guys absent, you might have thought all these guys are leaving, they've opted out. Well, no, what had happened was a lot of those guys were taking finals because it was finals week. Now that finals are over, you get a truer representation of who actually is available and going to play in the bowl game. I was told Braden Swinson is expected to play. We saw a video LSU released, Chris Hilton catching passes. We anticipate he is going to play. So as you're wondering about some of these veterans, Miles Frazier, Brian Kelly told us on Friday, is going to play in the bowl game. So some of these veterans who had a decision to make, it's to the affirmative so far, and that's a really good thing. We gave you bits of good news in the portal with LSU landing 4 of its targets. But I want to remind you, it's not going to be all to the affirmative. You're not going to land every single player you want. For example, Dylan Thieneman is a safety. He was the number 1 safety in the portal that everybody wanted. LSU wanted him. And I use past tense because on Saturday, Dylan Thieneman committed to Oregon. So LSU missed on Dylan Thieneman, someone they threw their line in the water and they weren't able to reel him in. But they need safety help. Say Drines in the portal. We don't know if Jordan Gilbert's coming back. Even if he does, you still have to improve at safety dramatically. I label that as a must. And so the other safety players they were looking at, Zechariah Poyser, who's from Jacksonville State, one of the top safeties in the portal. It's LSU, Auburn, and Florida are the 3 there that they're in the mix for. And then I've also mentioned Jacoby Matthews, who's kind of a wild card here. Jacoby Matthews was a 5-star from Ponchatoula, ultimately signed out of high school at Texas A&M, was a 2-year starter there at A&M, entered the transfer portal after the first spring under Mike Elko, and wanted to transfer to either LSU or Ole Miss, but in the spring portal, you can't transfer within the SEC. So he ultimately didn't play football this season. He stayed enrolled, taking online classes, so he'd be eligible. And my understanding is Jacoby Matthews is going to transfer someone and be on a campus this spring to go through spring football and play in 2025. But that may be an option for LSU there out of the portal at safety. But one of the names, Dylan Thieneman, is headed to Oregon. So again, you're not going to get them all. So that's okay. You got to understand that. You're not going to get everybody, but you got to get enough of the guys at your greatest positions of need to make sure you don't have roster holes going into 2025. So we'll continue to follow it right here on Locked on LSU. Hey, thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts. So if you're listening on podcasts, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you every single day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.